Welcome back to the Sort of Syntax JavaScript Best Practices. I'm Jason Millhouse. You are extraordinary JavaScript developers, getting more extraordinary as the days go by. In this section, we'll be talking about logical assignment, a very valuable and often used tool in JavaScript. Let's take a look. So all of those logical operators that we use in standard conditional blocks and ternary conditionals, in fact, can make assignments much shorter, even shorter, than ternaries can. All right, I'm going to establish a armory variable here, and we're going to add a property called addSword. That addSword property is going to be a function, and it will take in a sword parameter, obviously. Now take a look at this first cool line of the addSword function. What is this doing? It's kind of spooky. I see this.swords 3 times. Well, what it's doing is examining the armory object and seeing if a sword's property actually exists. And if it does, then what it's going to do is just return that exact same contents of that property to the property itself. That may sound kind of weird, but here's what's cool about this ternary conditional. On the right-hand side of the colon, meaning if the sword's property does not exist, we're going to create a brand new empty array and pass it back to the sword's property, thereby creating a new property if it did not exist before. So in other words, this first line is saying, does the sword's property exist? If so, just go with that. If it doesn't, create a new empty array. That's what this ternary conditional is accomplishing for us. Now your question might be, how does the ternary conditional know, looking at this.swords, whether that means there's a property there or not? Well, remember that the ternary conditional is just looking for a truthy value, and if something is there that's not undefined or not a number or all those falsy values, it will think that there is something true there and go with the true option. Very useful. Now here's where the money is in this actual function. Now that we've built a swords property, whether it's the old one or a new empty one, we're just going to push the sword, that's the parameter, into that list of swords that we have built or the one that we had. Now this section is about logical assignment, so what we're going to do is transform this ternary statement into a logical assignment. Now this ternary conditional works just fine. It will evaluate whether a property exists and either assign an empty array or go with the pre-existing property. But we can eliminate a read of the sword property through a logical assignment. Let's take a look. So first we will get rid of the question mark, the condition to check, as well as the colon. And we'll scoot some stuff over here. Now, in between the second this.swords and the empty array, we'll stick a logical OR operator. Now, when used in assignment, the OR operator is going to select the very first truthy value that it finds. Can you see how that works? Now, when used in assignment, that OR operator that you've seen before will actually try to select the very first value it finds that's not falsy. In other words, it's looking for the very first truthy value that it can grab onto for the purposes of assignment. So since this may be new for you, let's take a look at what happens if the swords property is empty and does not exist. If I got this.swords is set equal to either the existing property or the empty array, what will happen when we get to this.swords? It will be undefined. That is falsy. The OR operator will ignore it and instead select the empty array, which is not falsy. So what happens as a result? The empty array gets assigned to this.swords. Now your question might be, well, isn't the empty array kind of falsy? I mean, there's nothing in it. Nope, doesn't care that the array itself is empty because the array is just a data structure, which is not false at all. So what happens if the swords property actually has something? It's actually got some contents. Let's take a look. So now when I set up my logical assignment, I will get some array that's got some swords in it, or the empty array. And since the array with some swords in it is truthy instantly to the OR operator, it's going to take that and assign it directly back to this.swords. A mistake often made with OR logical assignment is that developers sometimes think that both of the contents of the logical assignment get examined. That's not true, because in this case, as soon as it finds a truthy value, it will instantly make the assignment. That process is called short-circuiting. What does that mean? It means that the empty array, in this case, will never even get looked at. So now we're going to take a look and see what happens when we try to use our add sort function with its logical assignment. So we'll scoot our little armory object in here. It's got our add sort function at the bottom, right? No sorts property yet. So now we call the add sort method using the broadsword, trying to pass the broadsword into the list. So our logical assignment triggers. It looks to see if this dot sorts is there, and it is not. And since it's not, we'll take a brand new, fresh, clean, empty array and pass it to the this.sorts property, which will be created on the fly. Following that, we'll just push the broadsword to it, and you can see that broadsword gets added to the empty array. Next, to further populate our swords list, we'll try to add the katana to our swords array. Function gets called, katana gets passed in. In the logical assignment line, now this.sorts exists. That means that the OR operator sees this.sorts and says, oh, got something that's true. So I'm going to go ahead and assign that back to the this.sorts property. You can see that the katana gets added to the array. And now if we add the claymore, the same process that occurred for katana will repeat, and we will get the claymore added to the array. Same thing with a scimitar, because this dot swords exists for each one of those additions. And now if we were to log out our armory.swords property, we can see we've got the full array with every last sword that we have added. Something to note here is that the order that we have placed our choices definitely matters, right? We want to make sure that the empty list is only chosen as the very last resort. We always want to go with the existing swords property in this case. So order definitely matters in your logical assignment. Now to really see that the order does in fact matter, let's take a closer look at that OR assignment. The OR is going to take that leftmost truthy value every time, and if none exists, it's always going to be that last falsy value. So let's see what would happen if we switched up the order of the assignment. So we'll switcheroo here, put our empty array first, and this.sorts last. So what happens now that the empty list is first? Well, when used in assignment, the OR operator is going to try to take the very first truthy value that it finds. And what is an empty array all day, every day, forever? It is a truthy value. And so every single time that this logical assignment takes place, we're just going to get that empty array over and over again. Let's see what happens. Well, when we try to add the broadsword this time using the add sort property, yep, we're going to get an empty list, no problem. We're going to get that returned to the this.sorts property, and there's our nice empty array. Then broadsword gets pushed into that empty array, so everything appears to be working right. What's going on? So now what happens when we add the katana? Well, this logical assignment's always going to short circuit on that truthy empty array because it's not falsy. So we try to add that katana and we get an empty list, brand new and fresh inside of our swords property. We have lost our broadsword, man. It's like it never happened. Then we push our katana into that empty array and trudge on to further data destruction, because when we continue to add the claymore and the scimitar, what would happen? Well, we'd get that empty array destroying our existing sword collection every single time, all because that empty array is truthy and short circuits the check. Then of course we log out our armory.swords, and what do we see? Well, one piddly little scimitar for the entire army. That is bad news for Master Armorer, who now has lost all of his swords, which probably sucks if you're the armorer. So, make sure that you put your default cases at the end of your logical assignments and be very careful to construct them well. To further refine our understanding of this OR operation, we're going to look at some other arrangements of truthy and falsy values just to see what they produce. So here in our first box, we've got the variable result1 getting the result of the logical assignment between 42 and undefined. Well, 42 will cause that OR operation to short circuit, and if we logged it out, we would get 42. Undefined is never examined. Next, in result 2, we're looking at an array with some strings in it, as well as 0 on the right-hand side. Well, the array full of strings, totally truthy, so we're going to go ahead and take that. And the 0 is never examined, again, because of the short circuit. Finally, we got result 3, which has an object in it. Object is definitely truthy. On the other side is the empty string. That empty string is never examined for the same reason because of the short circuiting, so when we log out result 3, we're going to get the object. What happens when we switch them up? So in the first one, when undefined is on the left of the OR sort of ignores the undefined, can't find a truthy value. Let's see what we got on the other side. We got a 42, and so 42 is truthy. We'll pass that back to result 1. When we log it out, we see we still get 42. In result 2, the array is on the right-hand side now, and since 0 is falsy, the OR will take the array and pass it back to result 2. Lastly, the empty string is falsy, and so we're going to take that object on the right-hand side of the OR, which gets logged out. Important thing to remember about OR operations is that the very first non-falsy value will be accepted. So your next question may be, well, what happens when they're all truthy? When all elements are truthy, we'll get the very first truthy value found. For example, if we've got both King and Arthur in our logical assignment, we're going to go ahead and take King because that is the first thing, the first truthy value that we find. In result 2, if we had Arthur first and King second, we would take Arthur because it's the first truthy value that we find. The moral of this story is that short circuiting will occur even if both of the values are true. Now the OR logical assignment has an interesting behavior when all elements are false. It will examine every possible entry and then take the very last one if nothing is true. So in this case, you see we log out result 1, and this logical assignment's way of returning a false value was taking the very last available entry since nothing else was true. In result 2, we put the empty string first and undefined last. You can see result 2, however, becomes undefined because that was the last thing, the last resort that it had to attend to.